Housing did say to the Treasury that we could justify $231 million of additional money if they were to recapture it from other states. The odds of that are very, very slim. Yes, sir.
Commissioner, one question on 211 that I don't think we've really addressed is when you were in my district, one of the local property managers had talked about their tenants being coached by 211 not to pay their rent. Did you do an investigation on that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Draymond. I mean, yes, there is nothing in any of the program material. There's nothing in any of the operations manuals. There's nothing in the training protocol that suggests that the message is that people shouldn't pay their rent. And I have tried to consistently say the message: if you can pay your rent, you should pay your rent. And I've yet to see somebody give me a written document from the Rent Help MN program where that is kind of a written statement. So beyond that, I'm hard pressed to, I mean, we've got a lot of people that are handling calls, and but there's quality assurance from 211 and others. And where, staff are off message, there's a whole supervisory and oversight mechanism to do that. I think, as I've reflected on this, I think one of the things for property owners is that they're used to being paid first. Matthew Desmond, who's written so much about evictions, used the great line that the rent eats first. And I think that the presence of this money, we've heard in some instances that people have been able to think about whether they're going to pay for a critical healthcare thing or they're going to pay for food. And they've been able to kind of make those decisions in a way that in the regular operation of the world, there wasn't any money available for rent, and the consequences of not paying rent were immediate eviction. And so I think people have been able to weigh their scenarios in a way where this money changed the calculation in people's heads. I remember being a kid out of college, and I knew who sent the nastygram fastest between my utility companies and stuff like that on months where I was cutting it close, and you just kind of learn to operate that way when you're operating paycheck to paycheck. But there is nothing in the program design, the program materials, the training materials, or in our understanding with our partners that would be a message that would come up from the program. And I invite any property who has received something in writing that they've interpreted to say that to please get it directly to me.
And then my last question has to do with the court cases that were alluded to earlier. We're getting reports of staff helping tenants, which is a good thing, but it kind of contradicts what the letter of the law was, or when we wrote this statute, I guess, and passed our legislation on this, that they had to have an application in. And my understanding is a lot of the court cases are being stopped right in the middle, and they're applying during the hearing, more or less, to stop them from being evicted. What is the training that goes along with that? What is the normal procedure?
Chairman Draheim, Minnesota Housing staff is there to provide information to the courts, to the property, to the renters about Rent Help MN and the status of an application when evictions are taking place. People might have legal aid, they might have a mediator. In many instances, what we've heard from the courts and the judges themselves is that they like to mediate eviction resolution in the presence of this money because everybody gets made whole, that the courts were interested in how this money was going to work. And so, we have stayed open for applications. Our interpretation of the evictions off-ramp wasn't that this program was shut down on October 12th. We've stayed open for applications because we still have money available. And, we have people who are coming into the program today that are behind for the first time now. and so they're coming in with an application for past due rent. So I think that what we're doing is simply trying to provide information. The courts have never had to interact with a statewide program of this magnitude, and so they have asked for help just understanding, what is the status of an application, and yes, I mean, courts might use the fact that they have a property and a renter standing in front of them or zooming in front of them, or however court actually works these days, and use it as an application to say, an opportunity to say, are you aware of this program and have you applied? And so we are just trying to be of assistance to the courts. My agency has never worked with the courts before. It's a separation of powers thing. But the courts have been very interested from really the day the evictions moratorium off-ramp was passed by you all to really understand what their role in this was going to be when evictions could be filed again. And so we've tried to figure out how to be available just to answer their questions and help out with the process.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think we'll switch gears real quick here and go to HIBs, housing infrastructure bonds. We do have 2 subjects left, and I'm trying to be mindful of everybody's time.
I have the ballot measures teed up next, but do you want me to jump over to the housing infrastructure bonds? I can do it either way.
Yeah, I think so. I think we try, if we have time, we can sure go back to that, but I'd like to just get all 3 subjects in real quick.
Okay. So I only have 2 slides on the housing infrastructure bonds after this header slide.
Okay.
You'll remember that when you authorized $100 million in housing infrastructure bonds this legislative session, yay, there was a contingency put on them. The bipartisan infrastructure bill hadn't been passed yet, and I think the Build Back Better bill was still being just discussed. It hadn't been passed by the House yet. And so the contingency was that if there were federal dollars passed, that we'd come back and take a look at whether they were same uses or different uses than what the housing infrastructure bonds could be used for. And it would decrease the authorization or limit how bonds were used based on that. The bill that the president just signed in the middle of November, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, did not have any housing-specific resources. No resources come to the agency as a result of that. There's an edge of things that we're interested in. It has some stuff on lead and broadband and other things like that, but there's nothing in the bill that has passed and been signed into law that's for housing. And obviously, the House passed the Build Back Better bill, but it's still in front of the Senate. If the Senate passes that, it's conferenced, I'm guessing, because I doubt the Senate will sign it or pass it exactly as the House did. If they do pass something, we'll have to pause. We've already put a pause on our annual selections. Instead of doing them this month, we'll be doing them next month so that we have an opportunity to see whether or not the Congress acted. And then if there's a housing component, we'll probably have to hit pause just to go through all the detail to figure out where the areas of overlap are and what's to do about it. But as of today, I feel like we're mainly in wait and see mode to see whether or not the Senate passes something and whether it materially looks like what the House passed, and whether that gets done by the date that's in the contingency, December 31st of this year. So I owe you a report back on that by January 15th. So obviously if something passes, we will be reading through the details super fast in order to be able to understand this. The federal Build Back Better bill is complex, but it hits in a number of key ways: improvements to the housing tax credit, expansion of housing tax credits for single-family construction, increases in 2 major HUD funding streams that we use, the National Housing Trust Fund and the Home Investment Partnership Program. We use that to predominantly to build new, very targeted housing for very low-income populations. And then it does some stuff around down payment assistance for people to buy a home. I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than what I just summarized there, but that's just kind of the 20,000 foot version of what the House passed in this bill. Do you want me to pause for questions on this?
Yeah,
Or should we?
please, Commissioner. Senator Port's been waiting a while, then Senator Rosen also has her hand up. Senator Port.
Thank you, Chair Draheim. You touched on it just a little bit. If you could go into more detail, Commissioner, on what has the practical effect of us writing that contingency into there? What effect has that had on your program decisions this year?
I appreciate the questions, Chairman Draheim and Senator Port. I think that as we have moved through our regular annual selections process and having the opportunity to, you kind of match projects to which flavor of money that we touch works the best for them. I think the effect of the contingency and the fact that the federal investments, that there's actually a possibility that they'll happen. I mean, I want to say that if the federal government does what the House has passed, it would be the largest federal investment in housing in my lifetime. And I'm not feeling very young anymore. And I think this is the same, as big as, the New Deal, perhaps, in terms of federal investments in housing. But the changes in the tax credit provisions and the potential that some of the housing infrastructure bonds would no longer be eligible has the practical effect that some of the projects that we would be selecting in January will be delayed until the federal funds that could be used instead become available. So that all depends on the speed of HUD and the speed of Treasury around guidance and allocation of those funds. So it's possible that things that I could have been selecting in December or could have been selecting in January won't actually get money attached to them until a year or two from now. So those developments or preservation projects would have to wait.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Senator and Commissioner. Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner. So have you, what has the conversations with the stakeholders about the possibility of these funds being available, and how quickly do you think you can get those funds out the door when the RFP does close?
Commissioner?
Chair Draheim and Senator Rosen, just a clarifying question. Are you talking about the selections that we're making right now?
Yes.
Thank you, Chair Draheim, Senator Rosen. This is capital investments in development and preservation deals. So usually a selection that we make in November or December of a year, that project is doing a bunch of paperwork and lining up of all their other financing with a hope of getting to a closing by the end of the year and a groundbreaking by the end of the year. Some of these deals that had additional gap financing that they need to raise, some of the more, we call them hairy deals in the agency, it's a technical term. Some of them take maybe longer, but we also have a couple outliers. But it's more about the complexity of doing, a $20, $30 million capital deal and what it takes to piecemeal, patchwork all the different funding streams together. We're a part of that. But I'd say the nice thing about being commissioner in my third year is that I'm actually being able to go to grand openings of projects that I was there when we selected. Projects that, some having the opportunity to kind of see things that I remember, like actually reading about my first year when I was learning the process. I think with the federal money, the timeline is a little more uncertain. The Home American Rescue Plan money that was set up in March, we had our allocations, I think, in the summertime, but HUD only just issued guidance for those funds this September, and they outlined a set of requirements where we do a bunch of community engagement in terms of the use of those funds. So sometimes the new federal money is going to have its own timeline based on the pathway that HUD decides to take with those dollars. In some instances, it's new uses of existing streams. In some cases, it's existing uses of existing streams. Existing uses of existing streams are much easier than new uses of new streams. And so with kind of new uses of existing streams being somewhere in the middle, if that makes sense.
Senator Rosen?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner, I thought that, we had added some language in that you guys had requested, and I don't think you guys ever communicated to me at least that our contingency would add a delay. You know, we worked with you guys to craft the language and implied the RFP would be issued this fall. So this is a little concerning for me. You know, I thought that's why we put that language in when we passed our bills this last year. Any comment on that, Commissioner?
Yeah, I mean, Chairman Draheim, the RFP that we're currently processing was already out in May before the session was out. So we had already begun, you know, that annual process, which is what we do usually. And then we usually just find out how much appropriations and housing infrastructure bonds we have, and we can plug it in as we're making final determinations at the end of the year. I mean, I think, you know, it's my recollection, but I'll go back and talk to Ryan and Dan, that it was an interest of the legislature to put the contingency language in because of the size of the federal investment. The agency didn't really have a need for that, but it was something that the legislature was interested in, so we worked with you on language that would be workable. My understanding of this is the legislature's interest. I think probably a lot of folks in the development community haven't tracked it at this level of detail. So I think that come January, you know, we'll have to do a lot of communicating with the development community. If projects that thought that they were had high likelihood of getting selected don't get selected, and certainly can keep you in the loop as we see whether or not the Congress passed and the President signs a second bill.
Okay. Yeah, and then my follow-up would be, I know we're short on time, but would be on the single-family homes portion of the HIBs and how that program is looking, and any comment on that?
Chair Draheim, we're in the middle of selections, so in an open RFP, they teach the commissioner very early on to just smile and nod, but not to preview who may or may not get selected. But let me just say we had some good single-family projects in the competition this year, and we look forward to making announcements.
Can you just briefly talk about how many applications you received, or how's it looking?
Yeah, sure, Draheim. I don't have that information at my fingertips today, and I'm standing alone in my home office. But we can follow up with you in terms of what we can share about the application pool. I know that we're, while the competition is open, there are some things that we're prohibited from talking about, but we'll hopefully be making selections by the end of January and can talk about what we have. We did do a set of what we call early no's. I like to call them not yet, but some projects that just clearly weren't going to get money. Sometimes it's in the developer's best interest to know they're not going to get money, so that if they have costs associated with site control and things like that, they can move forward with that information. So but let me check with my team, and we can follow up in writing with information that we can share. I just know that there are some things I can't legally share because we have an open competition taking place.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Members, any other questions on this subject? Okay. And then the last piece that we had on the agenda today was the rent control. And I think you had a couple slides on that, Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Draheim. I mean, these are issues that Minnesota Housing doesn't really have anything to do with, but as I've had visits during the legislative interim, it's certainly an area that people have a lot of interest in. So I thought I would just make sure that the letter of those ballot initiatives and what they do and don't do, that you have that information in front of you. You know, I really feel like the role of Minnesota Housing is just really focus on production and preservation and the affordability of housing where we have the opportunity to invest. To take the St. Paul ballot question first, it was short, specific, And a yes vote meant that rent increases are restricted to no more than 3% in a 12-month period, regardless of whether there is a change in occupancy. I believe that that is supposed to go into effect on May 1st of next year, and I think that Mayor Carter has been fairly straightforward about the fact that he's trying to understand what's in his authority to improve this language in response to his conversation with some developments that are pending, and the importance of developers to be able to raise the capital that they need on critical projects. But that one was, I would say, at least kind of, it was clear and specific. The Minneapolis language is more, I think it was kind of more of a taking the pulse. This is the opportunity, the city council is being told that they can enact an ordinance or they can pose another ballot question after they've had an opportunity to think about how they would implement something related to rent. So Minneapolis is kind of checking with the voters at the beginning of the process, whereas the St. Paul one is kind of has the specific effect of an ordinance starting in May. I don't, like I said, this is not an area that the agency works in. It's not an area where I have personal depth of experience or expertise. I have talked to the housing directors in both Minneapolis and St. Paul and wanted to offer the agency as a resource in terms of just data, if there's anything that we can do to inform their processes, but that's the extent that I think that Minnesota Housing will be involved in these local initiatives.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair? Thank you. And Commissioner, thanks. Fully acknowledge the fact that you and your agency had no part in crafting these pieces of legislation that were enacted or passed in two other cities. That being said, I know in full transparency, we discussed the notion of rent control in the state of Minnesota and the possibility that the state might introduce legislation that would prevent it from happening or prevent two laws like this from actually being enacted in the state of Minnesota. And so to the extent that the housing agency participates in statewide conversations as it relates to legislation and the positions that we take or that your agency takes on legislation that's being introduced that would impact some of these laws that are crafted at the local level is helpful. And I don't anticipate those conversations are going to end anytime soon. I know that as this committee met a few months ago, many opinions were shared regarding rent control, how it would potentially impact the state or certain cities, et cetera. And I anticipate we're going to have those conversations again moving forward. And your expertise and what your agency is experiencing or anticipates will be extremely critical to shaping those conversations and the legislation that the state of Minnesota looks at moving forward. So all that to say, and it might be early, however, I'd like to get your take on how do you think MHFA, or what do you anticipate these policies, the effect they'll have or how they might impact private development in the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul? Have you heard anything in any of the meetings that you've had, or has your agency done any analysis to see that now that these are likely to be enacted, how that might play out and impact housing needs or the housing situation in those cities?
Chair Draheim and Senator Duckworth, thank you. I'll say that
We lost her again.
God darn it. I think we lost your volume there, Commissioner.
My computer here keeps, the internet keeps disconnecting.
Are you plugged in?
The Wi-Fi.
but obviously the day after the election, it did get my attention, and it's something that that the agency will pay attention to. At this point in time, the administration doesn't have a well thought out or publicly informed.
Can you still hear me by chance?
On this. So
I don't think she can hear me either.
Where I am is probably about, the same as anybody who's been reading the paper or listening to the news. I'm trying to sort this out.
Commissioner Ho?
We're having some technical issues. Just 1 second. I'm very sorry.
Yeah. Sir, I'm having a problem hearing you now, and there's once again a lot of reverb.
We're having an issue hearing you on our end, so we're fixing it in the room. I apologize. If you could just pause for 1 moment until we get you back up and running, and I'll let you know. Or Senator Draheim will. Thank you. Sorry about that.
You're on a roll.
Now we should be.
I think we got you.
Can you hear me?
Commissioner, very, very sorry. Technical issues here with our hardware. Please continue. We missed part of that.
Chairman, just answer that question from the top, because I don't know where I cut out. But I'll just say that I understand that because these initiatives both passed, it's an area where the agency is going to need to pay attention. There isn't any detail developed yet on the Minneapolis one. It's the beginning of their process. And so I think there will be some lively debate in Minneapolis as they think about whether they want to do something or what they want to do. I don't think they're even compelled to do something given the language. And obviously, we'll be paying attention to the decisions that they make in St. Paul and the impact. I mean, for us, most of the time when we use federal or state resources in an investment, there are already some rent restrictions that come along with the use of those funds. So, we operate in an environment where oftentimes HUD is the entity that's kind of establishing rent reasonableness, including how much rents change from year to year. But there are places like down at the old Ford plant and other places where Minnesota Housing has commitments, as does the city, and where conversations are going to be had about whether developments are able to move forward as proposed. So we'll be engaged in those, but the administration at this time, we just haven't done the work. We haven't talked to our stakeholders. We haven't gathered research and information on other places in such a way that the administration has a position on this issue at this time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Dietzick, unless Senator Duckworth has a follow-up, I think we'll go to Senator Dietzick here in the room. Okay, Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to follow up on what Senator Duckworth said, because I do think that this is something that we will need to look at. Representing Minneapolis, I had a lot of discussion over the last few months on the, and Minneapolis was more open-ended than the St. Paul ballot initiative. It was more, should we have these conversations? And so we were having a lot of these conversations in neighborhood meetings, and you had a lot of small landlords who were raising the questions of, well, I have to pay my property tax, and I have to, what happens if I have, we have storm damage, or I need to do some upgrades, and then balance that with constituents who their building was bought, and so the rent then goes up $400 a month. So people can't afford that, and so how do we balance that out? And so I think it is a very, it is something we should have that conversation, because people can't afford $400 a month increases on rent. But then you also need to be fair. We also don't want property owners, property owners need to maintain that property. There's also been stories in landlords in Minneapolis who were not maintaining their properties, and they've been atrocious, and the city or the tenants have to go to court. And so what is that balance so that we can find a way that people can afford to live in safe homes across the state? So thank you. And I look forward to trying to figure out that question, because it's not an easy one, but I think we have to dig into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Dietzick, and I think we're all in agreement on that. I've had landlords call me concerned if this spreads outside of the metro because of the energy prices they're looking at facing this year, with energy prices going up so high. There are quite a few landlords in my area where the heat is included in the rent, and if the heat's going to double, how do they do that and still pay their taxes and their insurance and their mortgage, et cetera? But thank you, all good points. Commissioner, do you have any final comments? Senator Duckworth has one more comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it. And it's really just a quick question. I wanted to give time for the other topics, but it relates to rent help MN, if that's okay. It's kind of a fast one. And I want to make sure I'm even asking the right question. So, Commissioner, do you know, I know when we were crafting our bill a few months ago, the housing bill, we had some conversations surrounding the funds available to us from the federal government and whether or not those funds could be utilized to help offset payments owed to property owners who couldn't recapture rent that they lost out on because the tenant had already moved on and vacated the property. And one of the sticking points we had in crafting our bill here in Minnesota was the federal government didn't necessarily allow for those funds to be utilized in that scenario. Has that changed, or has the federal government now provided additional guidance that would allow us to do that? Do you know?
Commissioner.
Chair Draheim and Senator Duckworth, the Treasury did put out language, I believe in August, and we implemented that language, I believe the first week in October. And what it says specifically, the Treasury kind of put some lines around it. The Treasury said that the previous renter still needs to request it, so it doesn't take the person who's left out of the equation. They still have to request it, because I mean, it is still a win-win, because they get rid of that credit obligation and can move forward. We've seen instances where the property manager and the renter worked out an agreement and have requested this. So there's a pathway for folks to be able to do this, but the Treasury was really clear that the renter still needs, or the previous renter still needs to be engaged and involved in that process.
Senator Duckworth?
So just a quick follow-up to that would be any stipulations or requirements that we're requiring folks to work through as it relates to this program is coming from how the federal government has worded or structured this program. We're not adding any additional requirements at the state level in regard to the program for them to be able to recapture this assistance. Would that be a fair statement?
Commissioner?
Yeah, Chairman Draheim and Senator Duckworth, it's a different set of attestations that people have to sign, because the attestations that existed prior to implementing this included "I am still in the unit," which was the Treasury had required. So there's a different set of things, but it's not a set of over and above. It was just what we needed to do to be compliant with the Treasury's new guidance.
Thank you. And lastly, I just want to thank you for your kind words at the beginning of the hearing. And like Senator Rest mentioned, we don't often get told we're doing a good job for the things that are going well. We tend to focus on where we can improve. From what I recall, the last time we met this summer, from where we are now, a lot more applications processed, a lot more money out the door. Obviously, as a result of this hearing, there are still things we can do to improve, probably a lot so on the customer service side. And so thanks to you and your team for constantly hearing our feedback and finding how we can improve this process and improve the assistance that's going out the door. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth. I appreciate that.
Senator Port, you have a question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Draheim. I'll try to be quick. Just walking through all three of these, the rent help, the rent control, and the HIB, today really has sort of highlighted for me, and something I've been thinking about before anyway, is that 30% AMI. Even if we establish rent control immediately today and froze all rent across the state of Minnesota, which is obviously not happening, we are still 100,000 units short of the need for that 30% AMI based on the Minnesota Housing Partnership study this year. And I mean, like, to me, that is a huge concern, and this rent help money is going to run out soon. It's not a program that's going to run forever. We're going to exhaust it before the need is over. I'm still just go back to the very first time you presented to us in this committee last year, talking about if there was one thing you could change, it was just more. We need more. That has stuck with me through all of this. And I'm wondering two questions. One, if you can, I'm sure you don't have it, but if you can get us information on what percentage over the last several years of HIB funds have been used for that sort of 30% AMI need, and how are we even making a dent in it? Are we starting to sort of improve that need, or is it growing because wages aren't increasing? Where are we with that? And then secondly, just can you talk briefly about, after the pandemic or through the pandemic, how much has that increased the urgency for that group of families in Minnesota?
Commissioner?
Chairman Draheim and Senator Port, thank you for the question. Yeah, I mean, a lot of renters and homeowners were paying more than 30% of the federal standard, and some even more than 50% of their total take-home income on renter housing. And I mean, that's just a challenge to be able to juggle the bills. And obviously, you know, I think some of the stimulus money helped, but you know, it's all going away, and we don't know how long the pandemic is going to last at this point in time. We're all so over it, and we don't know how long the economic recovery is going to take. We know it takes longer for some than for others. You know, I mean, housing by and large in Minnesota and in this country is a private market. It's a private market, period. And there's some state and federal assist, but the state and federal assist has never been and is not big enough to be able to make housing affordable, especially for folks that make the least. You know, I have maintained and continue to maintain, and so much gratitude for the year after year housing infrastructure bond opportunities, and with this federal money, as much as I know how much pain all that goodness will create. You know, this requires a multi-year effort, and it requires a multi-year effort that's targeted at people who make the least. And the reason that it needs to be targeted from government at people who make the least is that the private market tends to people who make more. And so, you know, I think one of the things that we've done at the agency in my tenure is we've taken a look at the agency's role in how rents get set in projects that we finance, and have done more to use the fact that we're financing them to help drive rents down, both in terms of prioritizing which projects we fund, but also in the final underwriting in the final deal. We literally are looking at what the rental limit is per unit. And we shouldn't be putting state and federal money into something where the rent's too high for somebody to be able to use a housing choice voucher. And not be able to leverage in those federal funds. You know, we really just need to understand that building units at 60% AMI, 50% AMI, 30% AMI, that's kind of a vital contribution when the public invests in housing. And so, I mean, we do lots of other amazing things like help people, you know, first generation home buyers and things like that. It's really important as well. I mean, we can't be, it's not an either or here. The same way it's not an either or between preservation and new production. My hope is that if we get a federal infusion, I think it's a 5-year infusion from the feds, if it were completed the way that it passed out of the House, and if we have kind of a sustained commitment at the state, we can actually help the development community expand the pipeline so that we have more good projects coming through. I think I've mentioned this before. Even with a good housing infrastructure bond year, I say no to 3 out of 4 things that come in the door because I don't have more resources to do more. I would like to say yes to almost everything that comes through the door. I mean, every now and then just one of them just isn't viable. It's not going to happen. But again, you know, it's about selecting because of scarcity of resource, not because of the goodness. But the developer community also needs to develop the capacity to have me say yes to more than one of their projects every year. Because, you know, if you submit 3 and you only expect to get 1, you have planned capacity to build 1. I would like to get to the place where the developer community can submit 4 and expect to get all 4 and have the capacity to do that. I think the jobs market and lots of other things are going to be factors in that along the way. So I have maybe more answer to that question than you wanted at this late hour. Perhaps Chairman Draheim, the best thing for the commissioner would just be brevity in thanking you for the opportunity to be in front of you in the committee today. I was also looking, Senator Duckworth, when I was in front of you in July, I hadn't spent $11 million yet. You know, hitting 274 at the end of November to me is proof that we're getting the job done, and the fact that we're going to be thinking about how we shut this thing down, up and running, I think is the next big challenge. We will keep you posted on what's in a second federal bill if it passes the Senate and signing the law. And how that impacts the selections from this year. But thank you very much for your time, your attention, kind of your commitment and passion for these issues, and for being in dialogue with me during the interim, and even for those who were able to host the visit. It was nice. Some of you I've only known 2-dimensionally. it was nice to be able to meet three-dimensionally, and I really appreciate that.
Commissioner, I had a couple comments real quick, then we'll wrap it up here. Senator Port brought up the number of units needed. Thank you, Senator Port, for bringing that up. We will differ on the number. 50,000 is kind of the number that I've been tracking. In our negotiations, you know, we talked about we can't buy our way out of this problem. You know, there just isn't enough money out there for government solutions to help with this unit issue that we have here in Minnesota. And that's why we were pushing some free market solutions in a lot of different aspects of housing. We don't need to get into all that today. But one of them was rent control. And what rent control does historically throughout the world with the number of units being created. And, you know, it's been in the media quite a bit about people pulling back from projects. You know, from my real estate background, development background, I've seen a ton of housing units come up for sale in the last month in the Twin Cities. I know it's had an effect. You know, Commissioner, moving forward, I mean, where do you stand on this important issue, you know, when we're looking for more units on the rent control? You know, I know what happened during negotiations when we had that loophole bill in there to close that loophole. You know, it wasn't supported, but seeing the reaction so far, I mean, where are you at, and where do you think you and your agency needs to be at?
Chair, you know, the agency at this point in time doesn't have a position, and I think that it's something that we need to study, we need to get stakeholder input on. I mean, one of the ways that I have viewed the two local ballot initiatives is that it does create an opportunity to understand effects here in Minnesota if they move forward. I think there's a bigger conversation that you've outlined around where is it that the state is going to insert on housing policy issues, and where is there going to be local decision making. And I think that will be a broad conversation in the next legislative discussion. I feel like the agency's primary role is to do everything we can on production and preservation, and to do you know, the extra work that we're able to do because of our partnership with you on everything from homelessness to homeownership. So this is a new area for us, and not one where the agency has worked through all the stakeholder engagement and study that's needed to take a position on an issue like this.
But I do believe during negotiations you did oppose that provision along with the governor on the rent control.
Chair Draheim, I'll have to go back to Dan and Ryan. I can barely remember what I had for dinner last night right now, but I can go back and take a look at that and follow up with you.
Okay, fair enough. And then while we were in this hearing, the email that was attached to the Zoom meeting, the person that sent me that just sent another email. Just real quick, we'll end it with this. Came at 10:45 this morning. Hi all, just an update from my side of things. My wife was almost in tears to see that our status was again bumped to requires applicant response. See case manager communication below. As we thought we had potential to be funded this week, I don't know what else to do as I only have 2 quarterly utility bills attached, and I have no updated bill to provide. That's what they're asking for. He goes on to talk about how it's been months for him applying and getting the runaround. But I encourage all members, I'll forward this on to the rest of the committee. You know, this is affecting real people and not just landlords, members. This is a tenant. And we worked really hard on this bill to get people help. And that was the whole goal of our response, was to get people whole, not only the tenants and the landlords, and get things back to normal. So we need to do better. I thank you, Commissioner, and thank your staff for what they're doing. And all the words in the world don't mean anything to this young couple that is ready to get evicted. And have applied and tried to do the right things and went through the program and still can't get help. And it's hard on us senators, and I know all of us have had calls from tenants wanting help navigating this system that unfortunately, I know, Commissioner, you don't have control of. We're using a third-party vendor, but we need to do better, and I urge everyone to continue to communicate with the agency if they do have tenants or landlords that are having issues. Members, I do not have anything else. I could ramble all day on this. Commissioner, I really do appreciate your time. Members, any other final thoughts, comments? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone, and have a happy holiday season. Thank you.